Hey everyone, welcome. Today is going to be kind of two videos in one. I filmed a March wrap-up a while ago and then never posted it, and it's been so long, and I just was going to film this April wrap-up and decided just to combine them. So yeah, I'm going to talk about what I read in March really quickly, and then I'll talk about how my April went. And then, like usual, I'll give a little bit of a sneak peek of what I hope to do in May. So yeah, without further ado, here's what I read in first March really quickly. So March was kind of light on novels because I was finishing two that I'd started in February. But I did read a bunch of graphic novels. I saw the new Batman movie, The Batman, and loved it. It kind of instantly became my favorite of the Batman movies. I thought Robert Pattinson was great. The whole vibe of it, the really kind of gritty noir detective, loved it. Loved the whole vibe. So, being the person I am, I then went on kind of a Batman graphic novel buying spree. And so yeah, here's what I read in terms of Batman graphic novels. So I read Hush, which is kind of a newer absolute classic. It became a classic kind of almost instantly. And yeah, this is a really good one. It introduces a new Batman villain called Hush, who, you find out has real connections to Batman's background, to his history. So it feels like a very kind of personal villain that's been there all along, even though this is his first appearance. Really cool stuff with some of the Bat family. You see Superman, you get to see kind of a lot of Batman's rogues gallery. You see Poison Ivy, Catwoman. There's actually really cool stuff in this about Batman's relationship with Catwoman. You see Killer Croc, Riddler, Joker. This is an awesome one that kind of shows you a lot of what Batman is about, a lot of his villains. So highly recommend Hush. And then I also read, this was actually a gift for my birthday from my brother. This is Batman the Three Jokers. This was a really cool one. This was the kind of plot of this essentially revolves around the fact that there's not one Joker, but that there's three. It's very cool. So it's a very Joker heavy comic, which is very cool. A lot of stuff with the Bat family, which is cool. And just to show you how kind of wild it gets, this is one of my favorite panels. This is Batman facing off against a Joker shark. A shark that's been infested with the Joker serum. So absolutely wild, frankly kind of bonkers story, but really fun, really cool Batman story. I also read Batman the Imposter, which I really liked it. It was my least favorite of the ones I read so far, but I did really still enjoy it. And it follows, it's like year 2 or year 3 of Batman's career. And he's still, trying to figure his stuff out as Batman when an imposter Batman shows up and starts kind of murdering people very publicly. So Batman is trying to find out who this person is while also trying to clear his own name. Very, very cool and really cool art in this one. The kind of the layout of the panels was really interesting at times. So for the art alone, I'd probably recommend this one. And then I think, this is the last Batman graphic novel I read in March. This was The Long Halloween, which is an absolute classic. It was written, I think, in the late 90s. And again, kind of became an instant classic. It follows an early career Batman. I think it's like year 2 or 3. You see a lot of his rogues gallery in their early days, like the Joker, the Riddler. You see people like Calendar Man in a really creepy, almost like Hannibal Lecter type role. It's essentially a really heavy detective story. It's Batman essentially trying to solve the serial killer case that keeps killing members of this crime family. So really detective forward if you're into that side of Batman. And it's also a really cool origin story for Two-Face. So highly, highly recommend this. And then that takes me into the novels. So from February, I was finishing up Nicholas Lietzau's Dreams of the Dying. I loved this book. Really, kind of dark, brooding, atmospheric look at depression and PTSD in a fantastical setting. I really highly recommend this book. It's a big book. I took my time with it, and I'm glad I did. Because yeah, I mean, like it is fast paced. Like it's a really cool action fantasy story about this mercenary in this kind of Caribbean inspired archipelago kingdom, essentially traversing his own and other people's nightmares to try to solve this mystery. So it's really cool story wise, but yeah, really dives into themes of like depression and PTSD and things like that. So highly recommend this book. And then the other book I was kind of finishing from February was Terry Pratchett's Mort. So this was my first Discworld novel. For those of you who don't know, Discworld is a massive series. It's over 40 books, written by English author Terry Pratchett, and it's a very absurdist, satirical, kind of comedy fantasy series. And you don't have to read them in order. I think there's certain sub-series within those 40 books that you kind of have to read in order, but a lot of it is kind of standalone and you can kind of read in whatever order. So this is the fourth book in the actual Discworld series, but it's the first book of the kind of series focusing on death. So yeah, I liked this book. I didn't love it, but I think it was a good starting place. I thought it started really strong and then it kind of got away from itself, I think. It just got really kind of hectic and haphazard by the end. But it was. I liked the humor. I liked the world, the kind of absurdity of it. So I am definitely going to try more Terry Pratchett and Discworld. I might try the Witches series next, which starts with equal rights. So yeah, I liked this book, didn't love it, but definitely going to do more in this series. And then the one book that I started and finished in March was Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So this is my first look into John Gwynne. I think this is his 9th published book. He did, I think, the Faithful and the Fallen series, and then Of Blood and Bone. I think that's what they're called. And nothing against them, but they just never interested me that much. And then for some reason, this one really kind of caught my eye. So this is very Norse-inspired epic fantasy, and it really is epic, like in imagery and scope. One of my favorite moments has to do with a city that's built into the skull of a giant dead snake god whose like body makes up this continent spanning mountain range. So like really epic in scale and imagery and things like that. And yeah, really cool story. Kind of follows 3 separate characters, and you kind of get the sense that they're going to slowly converge. Yeah, I really recommend this book if you're into that kind of Norse-inspired, really epic kind of action-packed fantasy. Okay, so then that was March. So now going into April, this is what my April has been like. So I started off continuing my Batman spree a little bit. So I read Zack Snyder's first volume of the New 52 Batman run. So this started with The Court of Owls. This was awesome. I loved this so much. This is another new one that kind of became an instant classic. It introduced a new villain that also kind of became now, you know, a fan favorite, which is the Court of Owls, and specifically Talon, who's kind of their head assassin. Yeah, I loved this book. This kind of shows Bruce Wayne and Batman at their height, you know? It's a Bruce Wayne who's actually really involved in public life, doing a lot of fundraising, trying to improve Gotham, trying to use his wealth and privilege, like, you know, to improve his city. And then it's a Batman who's really, you know, who feels like he's really mastered the city. He's dealt with all these villains. He's got this rogues gallery that he's kind of dealt with. You know, he's learned how to, you know, I don't know, he's kind of bested everything. So he's a Batman at his prime. And then it's the emergence of this new villain that you realize has actually been around for centuries, and he's always dismissed them as a rumor, the Court of Owls. And they kind of shake his very foundation. They shake who he thinks he is as a person. They shake, you know, what he thinks Gotham is and his place in it. So yeah, this was a really cool Batman story, and I highly recommend it. And I'm going to continue on soon with Volume 2, which is The City of Owls, I think. Okay, and then the first novel I read in April was She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And this was a bit of a slow burn, but I ended up loving it. This is essentially kind of the story of Mulan. Like, this and Mulan are based loosely on the same historical event. And it follows a young woman in kind of, I don't quite know when, but kind of medieval China. a young woman whose brother and father die, and she decides to steal her brother's fate. Her brother was fated for greatness and she was fated for nothing. So when her brother dies, she decides to impersonate her brother and steal his fate. And through her own kind of sheer willpower, she just pushes for greatness. And so really cool, really interesting, kind of merciless main character. But yeah, this was a great book. Really interesting things about gender, really interesting things about, you know, kind of morally gray main characters, and ideas of destiny. So I highly recommend it. And I think it is the first of what's going to be a series. So I am excited to see more from this series. Then I read a book that I really was anticipating to kind of like, but not really care that much about. And it kind of instantly became one of my favorites of all time. And that's Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. So there's actually a review already up on my channel about this book. Please go check it out. But yeah, I loved this book. This is the sequel to Ender's Game. And it follows essentially Ender 3,000 years after the first book, going and learning about a new alien species and trying to kind of act as the bridge between humanity and that alien species. I don't want to say too much more because I spoil it. And I do give some light spoilers in my review. But yeah, I loved this book. And I'm probably going to do Xenocide, which is the third book, somewhat soon. But I do hear that this is definitely the peak of the Ender series. That Xenocide and the fourth book, Children of the Mind, are definitely a bit of a step down. But yeah, so I loved this book, highly recommend it, and I will continue on. Okay, and then I read Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this was my first novel by Rebecca Roanhorse, but I did read a short story of hers when I was in my undergrad, and I took a sci-fi English course. And it was a really cool short story. I think it was called Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience. And I think, for those of you who don't know, I believe Rebecca Roanhorse is Black and Indigenous, living in one of the southern states of the U.S. Yeah, New Mexico. So this book is inspired by kind of pre-Columbian, pre-colonization North American indigenous cultures. So, you know, that's a part of the world that I don't know much about yet. It's one I'm hoping to learn more about. And this book, you know, is super fantastical, epic fantasy, really cool, you know, magic systems, really cool culture, really cool politics. Yeah, it essentially follows three different characters. You know, one of them is the head of this kind of religious order, and one of them is essentially a god reborn who's destined to destroy that order. So yeah, this was really cool. The sequel, I think, is called Fevered Star, and it just came out. So I'm definitely going to get to that pretty soon. But yeah, I really liked my first kind of taste of Rebecca Roanhorse's novels. Okay, and then we have one nonfiction that I read this month, which is Feminist Edges of the Cron by Aisha Hidayatullah. This is really cool. This is a book that's been on my radar for years, because a lot of what I studied in my undergrad was Islamic studies, and specifically kind of gender in Islamic studies. So this is kind of a new classic. I say new, I actually don't know when it came out. I think sometime in the last 5 years. And yeah, this is a really good book. I don't really know how to get into it much because it's very academic, but it's very cool. It kind of gives a history of Quranic exegesis, something that in Arabic is called tafsir, as well as kind of a brief history of kind of modern feminist studies of the Quran. And yeah, this is a really cool book. If any of you are interested in Islamic studies or gender and religion, this is a really good book to start with, or maybe not start with, but this is definitely one to look out for if you're interested. Yeah, and then the last book is one that I've started, so we'll carry over into May, and that is The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. This one is a long time coming for me. I read the first two books of the Daevabad trilogy, City of Brass and Kingdom of Copper, almost 2 years ago now, I think, and I really, really loved them. I don't know why it's taken me so long to get to this one, but here I am finally. It's also much bigger than the first two. But yeah, I've started this. I'm only a few chapters in, but I'm really enjoying it so far. It's nice to be back in this world. And it's cool to see, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of historical fantasy. It starts in kind of 18th century Cairo during the French invasion of Egypt. But very quickly it moves to the fictional city of Daevabad, which is a Jinn city. So it's kind of historical, but then for most of it, that history doesn't really matter too much. But in this one, without too many spoilers, they're kind of back in Cairo for at least a little while. So it's really cool to see Chakraborty's historical research come in again, because I know she's a big history buff of that era of Middle Eastern history. And I'm really excited for her next book, which I think is like medieval inspired kind of pirate Middle Eastern fantasy. So very excited for that. I follow her on Instagram, and yeah, she like posts reading lists and like the syllabus that she's kind of made for herself for researching that book, and I'm so excited. So yeah, I'm reading this. It'll carry over into May. And then last but not least, just to give you a sense of what I might try to do in May, not every book, but 2 books that I really want to get to early on. They'll probably be the first 2 I get. In terms of nonfiction, I want to read Yemen in Crisis by Helen Lackner. So this is about kind of the humanitarian crisis and the civil war in Yemen. The war kind of started similar to Syria, started as part of the Arab Spring, and then kind of just devolved, unfortunately, due to international interference, into a civil war that's still going on. And it's one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history. So I really want to do this because my background, my academic background, is in Arab history, but specific parts of the Arab world. The Arab world is over 20 countries. I focused on mainly Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan. So this is Yemen, and it's an area that I know less about, but I'm really excited to learn. And then last but not least is another fiction that I want to get to. This is 12 Kings and Serakai by Bradley Beaulieu. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. This is a series I don't know much about. This is the first book of the Songs of Shattered Sands. So yeah, I don't know if it's inspired by the Middle East in terms of its content, but its setting seems very kind of medieval Middle East. So that's really cool. That's a setting that I'm really interested in. And yeah, I think it's the start of a 6-book epic fantasy series. So I'm excited to get to that. And then before I forget, there was one other book I started in April. And then I stopped. I DNF'd it. It's the first book in a long time I've DNF'd. And I don't have it with me, but it's The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett. And parts of it were really cool. The horror elements were cool. The kind of setting was kind of cool. It was very suspenseful and tense. I just really didn't like the way he wrote about women and wrote women characters. So, I've started a new job and it's full time, so I have less reading time. So I really want to make sure the books I'm reading are books I'm really enjoying. And I enjoyed parts of it, but I couldn't really get past some of it. So I decided to DNF it. I might do a video in the future about books I DNF'd and why. I think that might be kind of a fun, gossipy, or whatever video. So yeah, that's what I read in March and April, and a little bit of a look ahead to May. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you have recommendations, and I will see you guys soon, hopefully with more reviews and more book hauls, monthly wrap-ups. So yeah, thanks for checking in, guys.